There are moments in life that fracture everything you once believed to be solid. For Chelsea Hamilton, this was one of them. The image of her father, Bill Hamilton, a pillar of strength for most of her life, now lay fractured against the crisp white linen of a hospital bed, tethered to wires. But watching her father groan through bouts of dizziness and hide flashes of pain behind half-hearted smiles stirred in her a deep and paralyzing fear. She knew him well enough to recognize when he was bluffing, and the way he reassured her, too quickly, too calmly, rang louder than any alarm on the machines keeping him under surveillance. Something wasn't right, and she could feel it creeping into her bones like winter chill. What made the unease even more potent was the presence of Madison Montgomery, the strikingly poised physician who had entered Chelsea's life under the fluorescent glare of hospital lighting and stayed long after visiting hours were over. A woman with intellect sharp as ice and eyes that revealed little but saw too much. Madison was not just Bill's attending doctor. She was also Chelsea's romantic interest, someone who had sparked unexpected warmth in a life otherwise ruled by schedules, legacy, and sterile ambition. Their relationship was new, raw, and untested, and already teetering on the edge of emotional contradiction. Was Madison the bridge Chelsea had long needed to cross toward emotional vulnerability, or was she the gatekeeper of secrets too volatile to ignore? The question had started as a whisper in Chelsea's mind, a flicker of doubt she tried to ignore, but now it roared. Bill's condition, officially labeled as post-stroke cognitive instability. He was hiding it. When the doctors weren't watching, he'd close his eyes not in sleep but in pain. When Chelsea asked him how he felt, he'd wave her off with phrases like, "just tired," or "nothing I can't handle." But Chelsea wasn't convinced. She'd seen him reach for the left side of his chest more than once. She'd caught him flinch when adjusting his posture. And every time he tried to get up, there was that subtle stagger, as if the ground beneath him had betrayed his sense of balance. Yet the dissonance between what was reported and what Chelsea witnessed gnawed at her. And at the center of it all stood Madison, calm, methodical, and increasingly evasive. It was during one of Chelsea's unannounced late-night visits that she overheard a conversation that would change everything. The hallway outside her father's room was dimly lit, with only the hum of distant equipment as background noise. From behind the partially open door of Madison's office, two voices echoed. One was unmistakably Madison's, the other a senior specialist from cardiology. They weren't speaking in medical jargon, not entirely. They were arguing. Madison's voice, usually even and cool, had taken on a quiet urgency. "If we disclose the secondary clot, we risk triggering the cascade," she said. "He's not stable enough for anticoagulants, and you know it. That's not your call to make," the male voice responded. "She's his daughter. She has the right to know." Then silence. The kind of silence that screams truths unspoken. Chelsea didn't move. She didn't need to. The next morning, when she confronted Madison, the doctor didn't deny it. Instead, Madison stood in the quiet of Bill's room, eyes cast toward the heart monitor, and offered a confession laced with clinical justification. "I didn't tell you because I believed, no, I hoped he would stabilize. I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily." But Chelsea wasn't interested in hopeful calculations or risk mitigation. She wanted the truth. And more than that, she wanted to know what else had been hidden, because suddenly, the situation no longer felt like a misjudgment, it felt like a conspiracy. And Bill, in his silence, was complicit. That night, Chelsea pressed her father. For the first time, she didn't ask. She demanded. And after a long pause, the man she adored looked at her with tired, tearful eyes and gave her something she hadn't expected. A secret decades old, buried beneath layers of shame, fear, and protective instinct. Years ago, before Chelsea was born, Bill had suffered a smaller, undetected cardiac episode. It had been swept under the rug during his early career, during a time when admitting vulnerability as a black businessman in a white corporate world was tantamount to professional suicide. The only person who knew of this medical history was Madison, who had stumbled upon it while reviewing archived files and past imaging. Madison had confronted Bill privately, urging him to disclose it to the full medical team, but he had refused. "I've kept that part of me buried," he confessed. "Not because I was afraid of dying, but because I was afraid of what that weakness would do to you, how it would haunt you if you knew your father wasn't invincible." The moment redefined everything for Chelsea. The strength she had always admired was, in truth, built on a foundation of silence and selective omission. And Madison, whether rightly or wrongly, had chosen to preserve that illusion, at least temporarily. But Chelsea wasn't a child. She was a woman standing at the edge of an abyss, trying to reconcile the man who raised her with the stranger who hid a life-threatening secret. The romantic tension between her and Madison, once thrilling and electric, now pulsed with distrust. Could she continue loving someone who had lied by omission, even if it was to protect? After yet another dizzy spell left him weak and confused, Chelsea made a decision. She gathered the primary care team, demanded Madison be temporarily relieved of her role, and insisted on a full cardiovascular reevaluation from an outside specialist. The move was drastic but necessary. Madison, although stunned, did not protest. In fact, she quietly agreed, stepping back with a poise that broke Chelsea's heart even further. Their last words that night were not exchanged through conversation but through glances. Madison's filled with regret, Chelsea's with bruised resolve. What followed was both horrifying and vindicating. The new team discovered a minor clot lodged dangerously close to Bill's heart. A clot that, if left untreated, could have migrated and caused a fatal embolism. Immediate surgical intervention was scheduled, and the operation was a success. Bill survived, but something else didn't. Trust, intimacy, the unspoken belief that love and medicine could coexist without compromise. Weeks later, as Bill entered the early stages of rehabilitation, stronger and sharper than he had been in months, Chelsea found herself alone at a cafe not far from the hospital. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Madison. No words, just a photograph. It was of the two of them, taken on a balcony during one of their early dates, when life still felt full of possibility. Chelsea stared at it for a long moment before turning the screen face down. Some truths. She stood up, tucked her phone into her coat pocket, and walked away from the past toward a version of herself no longer afraid to question, to challenge, and most importantly, to choose truth over illusion. Chelsea once believed she could clearly separate work from emotion, the role of a daughter terrified of losing her father from that of a woman deeply in love with a brilliant doctor. But as the days passed and she continued to witness the way Madison avoided her gaze, the way her voice dropped every time Chelsea asked about her father's progress, her heart began to fracture along invisible lines. She could no longer deny the truth, that Madison, the woman who had once held her hand under dim lights in their most private moments, was growing increasingly distant every time she put on that white coat. Their love had once been built on trust, a belief that no matter how complicated things became, they would choose each other. Chelsea couldn't understand why Madison would choose to keep Bill's dangerous medical complications a secret, especially knowing that Chelsea was his only daughter, the one person who needed to be informed in order to prepare herself emotionally and stand by her father. Why didn't Madison trust her? Why did she choose silence and act as if Chelsea were nothing more than a bystander? And had Madison grown so attached to her role as a physician, making calculated, clinical decisions, that she had lost the emotional connection they once shared? Chelsea had once imagined their relationship as something rare, a bond between two strong. Love cannot survive without complete trust. But now, Chelsea felt their relationship had devolved into a silent negotiation between professional ethics and raw emotional need. And in that unspoken bargain, she was the one losing. She didn't want to fight for scraps of intimacy after every shift. She didn't want to sit in hospital corridors only to be told, in a detached voice, that everything is fine, when it clearly wasn't. If Madison couldn't or wouldn't draw a clear line between patient and partner, then Chelsea would have to, because love cannot thrive in the shadows of secrets. And then, on a cold night just after Bill regained consciousness from emergency surgery, Chelsea stood silently at the door to his hospital room and saw Madison adjusting the 4 monitor. They didn't exchange a word in that moment. But Chelsea's eyes were full of quiet disappointment. Madison started to move toward her, perhaps to speak. But Chelsea simply whispered, "If one day I'm the one lying in that hospital bed, would you hide the truth from the people I love, too? And if the answer is yes, then I need to know now."